you have to understand that Calvinism operates with a distinctively different view of freedom than Arminians do, and indeed it's a view of freedom that is not what I would consider the commonsensical view. The commonsensical view that most people would take for granted and assume when they hear the word freedom is what we can call libertarian freedom, and we can define it as follows. Libertarian freedom is freedom in which a free action is one that is not determined by prior causes or conditions. As he makes the choice, the agent has the power to choose a given action, and the power to choose not to choose the action. And it is up to him how he will choose. Now, notice this idea. A free action is one that is not caused, not determined by something outside the agent. The agent himself, it is finally up to him what he chooses. Now, Arminians do not say that we have this freedom intrinsically. We are fallen in sin, again, because of original sin. But God gives us grace that restores freedom and enables us to choose whether we will accept Christ, whether we will have faith, or whether we will not. Now, this is what, again, is crucial to understand. Calvinism operates with a totally different view of freedom. Again, going back to this passage I just cited. According to this passage, human beings, the persons who are saved, are both determined to that which is good, and yet they come most freely. Now, how can this be the case? Well, Calvinism, consistently understood, affirms what is called compatibilism, or soft determinism. It is so called because, according to this view, freedom and determinism are compatible. Now, again, this is counterintuitive. Most people, when they hear the word freedom, would say, well, look, if you're determined to do what you do, if you're caused to do what you do, in such a way that you can't do otherwise, you can't be free. But the Calvinist, the compatibilist, says, no, freedom and determinism are compatible. You can both be fully determined in what you do, and yet you can also be free. So, here's the definition again. There is no logical inconsistency between freedom and determinism. Freedom and responsibility are compatible with total determinism. Now, again, what kind of sense does this make? A lot of people think, well, this is just a flagrant contradiction, isn't it? Well, no, it's not. So if you really understand what the Calvinist is saying here, this is a perfectly coherent understanding of freedom. So here are the three conditions of a free action according to the Calvinist, according to the compatibilist. Number one, a free act is not caused or compelled by anything external to the agent who performs it. So you're not free if you are forced to act against your wishes or you are compelled. So if someone puts a gun to your head, if someone walks up and bodily grabs you and forces you to do something against your will, and all the time you're crying, no, I don't want to do this, you're not free. It is not a compelled action. Secondly, it is, however, the action that is free caused by something internal to the agent, namely a psychological state of affairs such as a belief, a desire, or some combination of these two. So there is a cause of the action. The cause of the action, however, again, is internal to the agent. You're not forced by something outside of you. Rather, it is something internal to you, beliefs, desires, feelings, etc. Thirdly, a free action is one in which the agent performing the action could have done differently if he had wanted to. So if he had different beliefs, if he had different desires, different thoughts, and so on, then he could have done differently. All right, now here's, again, the crucial thing to understand. For Calvinism to be consistent, for it to be coherent, it has to assume a compatibilist view of freedom. Now let me again cite a couple of passages from the Westminster Confession to illustrate this. Here is Westminster Confession 3, 1 and 2, and I quote, God from all eternity did by the most wise and holy counsel of his own will freely and unchangeably ordain whatsoever comes to pass. So there you see in that line a picture of all-encompassing determinism. God unchangeably ordains whatsoever comes to pass. Now it continues, yet so as thereby neither is God the author of sin, nor is violence offered to the will of the creatures, nor is the liberty or contingency of second causes taken away, but rather established. Now again, notice these claims. God unchangeably ordains whatsoever comes to pass, and yet this doesn't mean God is the author of sin. Nor does it mean that God in any way does violence to the will of creatures. In other words, creatures do what they want to do willingly. God doesn't cause them to act against their will. Okay, let's go back again to this passage that we've already looked at and look at it again in light of this definition of self-determinism or compatibilism. Let's look at this same passage from the Westminster Confession. All those whom God hath predestined unto life, and those only, he is pleased in his appointed and accepted time effectually to call by his word and spirit out of that state of sin and death in which they are by nature to grace and salvation by Jesus Christ, enlightening their minds spiritually and savingly to understand the things of God, taking away their heart of stone, giving them a heart of flesh, renewing their wills, and by his almighty power determining them to that which is good, and effectually drawing them to Jesus Christ, yet so as they come most freely, being made willing by grace. Now recall that second condition of compatibilist freedom. A compatibilously free action is one in which there is an internal cause, a desire, a belief, a feeling. Notice, in this passage we just read, what does God do to those who are elect? Well, he enlightens their minds. He changes the way they think so they can see the truth. Secondly, he changes their heart, takes away their heart of stone and gives them a heart of flesh. Thirdly, he renews their will. So by all of these measures, God makes internal changes, gives the person new thoughts, gives the person a different heart, gives the person a different will, different desires, so consequently they then want to come to Christ. So God determines this, causes them to have the desires, causes them to have the thoughts, causes them to have the feelings they have, and then as a result of this, they willingly come to Christ. So, according to this passage again, they come to Christ most freely, being made willing by his grace. So again, there's no inconsistency here, as Calvinists see it, between complete determinism and freedom. God completely determines the desires, feelings, thoughts every human being has, and consequently, they do the things they want to do, they do the things they wish to do, they act out their feelings, their beliefs, their desires, and consequently, as the Calvinists would see it, they are most free, even though they could not possibly act differently than they do, having been determined by God. Now, before I conclude today, I want to simply make a couple of other points. First of all, I'm not foisting upon Calvinism a view of freedom that they themselves reject. Theologically, philosophically sophisticated Calvinists recognize readily that if their view is to be consistent and coherent, they have to be compatibilist. Let me quote for you, for example, John Feinberg of Trinity Divinity School. He writes as follows: Calvinists, as determinists, must reject freedom altogether or accept compatibilism. So Feinberg is himself a Calvinist. So again, he himself readily recognizes that for the sake of consistency, if you're going to be a determinist, as Calvinists typically are, the only kind of view of freedom you can hold is a compatibilist view. Now, I conclude with one final point. There's a huge implication of compatibilism, and I'm going to explore this more fully in the second segment of this talk. And here's the huge implication. And you get this down, you will begin to understand where the really deep differences between Calvinism and Arminianism, the rest of the church, lies. And here is the huge implication. And again, I quote a Calvinist thinker, namely Paul Helm, an English philosopher, and he writes as follows: if we suppose some form of compatibilism, then God could have created men and women who freely, in a sense compatible with determinism, did only what was morally right, unquote. Now let that sink in. Think about this implication. If compatibilism is true, God could have determined things in such a way that all persons freely, as Calvinists define freedom in the compatibilist sense, all persons freely would have chosen the good at all times. But for some reason, reasons that are apparently important to God, He's chosen not to do so.